Good evening and welcome to the 9th Richard D. Hefner Open Mind Lecture. I'm Chuck Keaton, Vice Provost for Experiential Learning and a Professor of Physics and Astronomy here at Rutgers, New Brunswick. For more than a decade, the School of Arts and Sciences and the honors community have hosted the Open Mind Lecture Series, and this year we are delighted to partner with the Rutgers Democracy Lab to expand the student engagement, and I think you'll hear a little bit more about that in a few minutes. The Open Mind Lecture Series honors Richard Hefner, who is a longtime Rutgers professor widely known for his courses Communication and Human Values in the School of Arts and Sciences Honors Program and Mass Communication and the American Image in the School of Communication and Information. Professor Hefner's teaching was infused with careful listening and probing questions. His colleagues noted what he loved most was teaching. Great students were his inspiration and his joy. In 1956, Professor Hefner created the public television show The Open Mind to support thoughtful discussions of the values that shape contemporary society. Professor Hefner hosted the show for more than 50 years, and the show now continues with his grandson, Alexander Hefner. And now I'm pleased to welcome Alexander to say a few words about his grandfather. In addition to hosting The Open Mind, Alexander is the creator of Breaking Bread with Alexander on Bloomberg TV and co-author of the best-selling documentary History of the United States by Penguin. He's received numerous awards for his work covering American culture, politics, and civic life since the 2008 presidential campaign. Alexander.
Thank you all. Appreciate your time this evening. Thank you to Chuck. Thank you to the Rutgers Democracy Lab, and thank you to the Eagleton Center and Institute. And thanks most of all to our distinguished speaker and his family represented here tonight. When we thought about what had been missing in the lecture series since its inception, we thought about public servants because my grandfather really, from mayors of New York City to governors, he really appreciated the importance of communicating with civility, and Senator Ambassador Flake represents that and the values that my grandfather rigorously championed in the classroom, as the professor said, and on television. And you can continue to watch the archive of The Open Mind at theopenmind.com or 13.org/openmind. Even though public media have faced attacks and defunding in recent years, independent media, whether that be online or on television or pamphleteers, continues, and that's an important part of our First Amendment and the American way. But I just once again want to say thank you to the Rutgers community, and thank you to Senator Flake, and to our speaker in February next year, Senator Jones, for carrying forward what was my grandfather's lifelong mission to thoughtfully analyze, scrutinize, but to be humane most of all, and to recognize that the most important value is intellectual honesty. If you don't have intellectual honesty, you've got nothing. So thanks again for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alexander. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Ava Michelesi, the Chief Operating Officer of the new Rutgers Democracy Lab at the Eagleton Institute of Politics. Ava has a rich history at Rutgers as a student, member of the faculty, and administrator, and is now leading the Democracy Lab in its bold commitment to ensuring future generations have the tools and knowledge needed to strengthen and sustain democracy. Ava.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We're honored to have Senator Jeff Flake here with us tonight. Thank you for joining us. I'd also like to extend our gratitude to members of Rutgers' leadership team who are here this evening, including Provost Jason Geary and Eagleton Institute Director Elizabeth Maddow. I'd also like to extend our sincere thanks to the School of Arts and Sciences Honors Program and the Richard D. Hefner Open Mind Lecture for making Senator Flake's visit possible. Thanks to their partnership, the Rutgers Democracy Lab had the distinct honor earlier today of hosting, for the first time in the series' 10-year history, a fireside chat with Senator Flake, guided entirely by questions submitted by our remarkable students. Before we begin tonight's lecture, I'd like to take a moment to introduce the Rutgers Democracy Lab to those who may be hearing about it for the first time. Established in November 2024 and built on 70 years of expertise at the Eagleton Institute of Politics, the Rutgers Democracy Lab is an innovation engine where students, faculty, and staff come together to actively shape the future of American democracy. It's more than a place for study, it's a space for action. Whether exploring civic technology or advancing policy reform, the lab transforms bold ideas into real-world impact. Driven by student leadership and anchored by the guidance of seasoned faculty and practitioners, the lab cultivates a community grounded in active listening, meaningful dialogue, and bold collaboration. At the Rutgers Democracy Lab, we talk across difference, not around it. We're profoundly grateful to our founding donor, whose vision and generosity laid the foundation for this vital work. Without their support, the Rutgers Democracy Lab would not be possible. It's a privilege to welcome Senator Flake this evening. Throughout his career, he has embodied dedication to public service, principled debate, and respectful engagement, values that lie at the heart of the Democracy Lab's mission. We're grateful for his presence and look forward to a timely and thought-provoking conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all for this invitation. Cheryl and I have really enjoyed the day so far. I just want to say thank you so much to Chuck and to everybody who was involved, Alexandra, Provost Geary, Elizabeth, Nava, and the Democracy Lab team. Just a shout out to the Democracy Lab students. They're great. Great questions, tough questions. I thought it was going to be softballs in there, but no, not at all. But anyway, it's been a great day and really appreciate being here. Being on a college campus always reminds me of my wife, Cheryl, and I, our first experience on a college campus, the first day of school for both of us at Brigham Young University, Hawaii campus. There is such a thing. On the north shore of Hawaii, it's a little known or everybody would be there. But we met there on the first day of school when we should have been in class. We were on the beach. And we met and dated. And 7 years later, we returned, married with 2 kids by then, I think, 3. We went to that exact spot where we met on the beach and we reminisced, and then we drove up to the school, BYU Hawaii. I said to Cheryl, this place has changed. That's a new building on the right. She said, no, that's the library. It was new to me. Anyway, so I'm unfortunately reminded of that whenever we get on a college campus. I have to say, we did go to Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, where it's a little colder and a little more amenable to studying. So anyway, but we always love being on college campuses. But I've been asked to say a few words today about making the case for soft power and diplomacy. But allow me to digress for just a few minutes here. For most of my childhood and adolescence, I was fascinated by survival stories, mostly sailing adventures gone bad. That was my favorite genre. I always wondered, if I were marooned on a deserted island with minimal tools, could I survive? I talked about this so much with Cheryl over our marriage that 20 years into our marriage, she finally said, if this is your midlife crisis, get it over with. Maroon yourself already. And so I did. I searched on Google Earth and located a remote group of islands in the middle of the Pacific, the Marshall Islands. There are about 1,500 of them, some of them no bigger than this room. but I got permission to maroon myself. And so I went there during a congressional break in 2009, and I took very minimal tools, a spear, a pole spear, a machete, a magnifying glass to start fires, and a hammock, and that was about it. And this was the island. It's called Jabinwad, which means in Marshallese the end of the reef. I obviously took no food or water, and for meals, I thought I would spear fish and compete with the sharks that were ever present. Oh. There we go. Spear fish, and but it was a difficult thing to get the fish to shore before the sharks would get it off of my spear. But I was able to do that, and with that, I was able to survive eating a lot of coconuts and dodging the sharks out in the water. But as it turns out, finding enough food was the easy part. The difficult part was dealing with being completely and utterly alone for 7 days and 7 nights. First of all, it's a bit scary. How many of you have seen the Tom Hanks movie Castaway? All right, there's a scene there where he's scared in the middle of the night because there are some sounds. He doesn't know what they are. It turns out it's coconuts falling. I can tell you that's true. That is scary. In the middle of the night, thinking that you may not be alone on that little island. But anyway, that was the easier part was getting food. The tougher part was being lonely. By the third day, I was so lonely that I decided I would befriend the hermit crabs that would wander endlessly through my camp. Now, when I was on the island of Kwajalein before this adventure, it was a military base, and they gave me a Sharpie pen and said, if we're going to come and rescue you, then write a T on your forehead if you have applied a tourniquet. I thought, I've got 4 limbs. How long can it take? But I took the Sharpie pen anyway. So I had that Sharpie pen, and by the third day, I was bored. I wondered if these hermit crabs wandering through my camp were the same ones just doing laps, or are they all together different? So I picked one up and wrote number 1 on his shell, and then number 2, and then all the way to, by the end of the week, I had 126 numbered friends. I still remember and miss number 72, and number 12, I hope I never see again. He pinched me a number of times, but anyway, it was a long week. You know, I thought after that time about that, the old saying, taken from an old poem, no man is an island. I can tell you that is true. We are not meant to live alone. It's tedious. It's no fun. On that island, I saw 7 of the most beautiful sunsets that have ever occurred on this globe, and no one to share it with. We are not meant to be alone. You have to share the things that you love. In this world today, we are not solitary actors. We can't hide away. We can't pretend that the rest of the world doesn't exist. That's no fun anyway. So what do? We want to have peace and prosperity and happiness, and that entails getting along with people. Just a few miles away in New York City today, the world is gathered for the United Nations General Assembly, or UNGA. Now, in this era of alpha dominance, it's easy to forget the virtues of diplomacy and soft power. Now, high-minded rhetoric and saber-rattling sometimes grab the headlines, but it's often just quiet diplomacy that resolves crises and builds alliances and maintains the peace. Now, hard power, of course, is using force and coercion to get other countries to act in a certain way. This picture is of me just off the coast of Turkey on an aircraft carrier. Soft power or hard power has its place. It's certainly necessary. Tools of hard power are military strength, economic sanctions, trade restrictions, and threats. Examples would be the U.S. invading Iraq Russia using its military to invade Ukraine, or the U.S. imposing sanctions on Iran's banking sector. As I mentioned, some of these are necessary. But in contrast, soft power would be using no force or coercion, but shaping preferences and winning influence through attraction and persuasion rather than coercion. Tools of soft power include culture, values, diplomacy, foreign aid, education exchanges, global leadership in science and health, and moral authority. Examples would be American movies, music, universities, making people want to study and live in the United States. The Marshall Plan after World War II was perhaps the premier example of soft power. U.S. military exchanges, Fulbright scholarships, USAID. Let me give you 3 examples of the effectiveness that I've seen in soft power in my career. When I was just 26 years old, Cheryl and I found ourselves halfway around the world in the southern African country of Namibia. The League of Nations and later the United Nations had struggled on the issue of Namibia for half a century. But finally, the UN Security Council, through Resolution 435, had provided for Namibia to become completely independent of South Africa. Cheryl and I were in the Namibian capital of Windhoek, watching a new democracy take its first steps. Now, as fate would have it, Namibia had its first elections the same week that the Berlin Wall came down. That was awfully fortuitous. The fall of the Berlin Wall was a victory of soft power. The US and NATO never stormed East Berlin. The Soviet army wasn't defeated in battle. The Warsaw Pact wasn't dismantled by invasion. Instead, soft power eroded the Soviet bloc from within. East Germans would see West German television. They compared the terrible East German car, the Trabi, with a Volkswagen. They compared bread lines with supermarkets, censorship with free press. Every glimpse of jeans and jazz and democracy was a reminder that their system was failing. No amount of propaganda could fully block that comparison. Now, I remember in February of 1990 in Namibia, reading Czechoslovakia President Václav Havel's address to the United States Congress, the reflections of a dissident playwright who had become president after spending years in jail, in a prison cell put there by his Soviet-backed government. Havel thanked America for standing for free people as a beacon of freedom, for the power of example, for the example of democracy. In essence, he was recounting the effectiveness of soft power. Now, while in Namibia, Cheryl and I brought American constitutional scholars to work with Namibian leaders to work on the new Namibian Constitution. And what was so interesting to me at that time was that Namibian leaders, many of whom had been exiled in the Soviet bloc, weren't looking to consolidate power. They weren't interested in a strongman model. They'd seen the end of that movie. They wanted separation of powers. They wanted an independent judiciary. They wanted meaningful protections for individual rights. This man we're seen with there, this was taken just a few years ago when he was president of Namibia. He just passed away last year, but he was one of those that we worked with in 1989, 1990 to work on the Constitution and the elections. But that experience just helped me think about the United States and our role in the world. After years after independence, the Namibian ambassador came to Utah. He was given a tour of a warehouse where secondhand clothing was being baled up for distribution in some African countries. When he saw a large bundle of used clothing being baled, he started to cry. And he told his host that as a child raised in rural Namibia, shipments like these provided the only clothes that he wore. As I said, that experience shaped the way that I think about the United States and soft power. It taught me that people don't just look at our military power, they watch our example, our reliability, whether or not we keep our word. Example number 2, keeping with the Africa theme, in Zimbabwe. As a student at BYU in the 1980s, and I should mention a few years before, I had done a mission for my church in Zimbabwe and South Africa. But I spent hours in the library writing a master's thesis on Robert Mugabe, the strongman leader of Zimbabwe. I never imagined that years later, as a U.S. Senator, I would sit across from Mugabe himself in Harare, Zimbabwe, listening as he rattled off his grievances against U.S. presidents and British prime ministers. He despised Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton. He was mad that Barack Obama had stiffed him at the United Nations, he said. He was disgusted by Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair, and he reveled in the fact that he had outlasted them all. But at one point, I was a little tired of hearing these grievances. I reminded him that it was George W. Bush who created PEPFAR, the program that provided inexpensive antiretroviral drugs to many countries in Africa. And it saved millions of African lives, including in Zimbabwe. AIDS infection rates in Zimbabwe had reached nearly 25% of the population. Now, as I said this, Mugabe finally paused and quietly said, "I'll give you that." I could not wait to return home to the United States and tell then former President Bush that he had been praised by a brutal dictator. He enjoyed that, I think. But here's what we don't often talk about. In the case of PEPFAR, the most important thing, obviously, is that it saved millions of lives and alleviated a lot of human suffering. It was a moral imperative for us to do so, but it also served our national interest. We have economic ties, military basing agreements, intelligence sharing arrangements, and security partnerships all over Africa that we would not have were it not for PEPFAR. Third example, Turkey. I saw the value of soft power again firsthand, being ambassador to Turkey. As you can see on the map, Turkey sits astride east and west. Napoleon is rumored to have said once, if the world were one country, Istanbul would be its capital. It's in the middle of everything. If you think right now, Ukraine conflict going up just to the north, to the east, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Iran, to the direct south, Syria, going through its transition, and a little further south, Gaza. So it is right in the middle, as it always has been and probably always will be. But relations between the U.S. and Turkey were strained when I arrived. The previous ambassador was nearly declared persona non grata and kicked out of the country. Here's what it looked like when I presented my credentials to President Erdogan. This was his happy face. But just 6 weeks after we arrived in Turkey, Russia invaded Ukraine. As a consequence, Sweden and Finland realized that neutrality might be a bit overrated, and they wanted the protection that the NATO alliance offered. And so they sought for membership. But of course, for new members to be admitted into the alliance, every other member of the alliance has to vote yes. Turkey had a real problem with Sweden. They cited Sweden's permissive stance toward the PKK, a terrorist organization that the U.S. and the European Union and just about every country considers a terrorist. And they threatened Turkey's national security. Nearly 30 to 40,000 Turks have lost their lives to PKK terrorism over a few decades. So it's not an idle issue for them. Now, with 29 other NATO members eager to bring Sweden into the fold, the instinct of the United States was to apply hard power pressure to Turkey, to lecture, to strong-arm their leadership into compliance, to impose sanctions, to threaten to kick them out of the alliance. But diplomacy, not coercion, was the only path forward. We desperately needed Turkey, the second largest military in NATO, by far, next to the United States. We needed them to remain in good standing in the alliance. Sweden did have genuine steps to take, including constitutional and statutory changes to address Turkey's security concerns, but Sweden was reluctant to take these changes. And there was deep skepticism on the street in Turkey and in its parliament about Sweden's motives. Meanwhile, the United States had its own role to play. We needed to move forward on long-stalled F-16 fighter jet sales to Turkey. We needed them to have F-16s to stay interoperable with NATO. But there was intense opposition from certain key members of Congress at that time. So what resulted from that was highly technical, deeply choreographed diplomatic efforts that spanned about 18 months. Here you see me and Secretary Blinken and President Erdogan's foreign minister and his security chief. We spent a lot of time in rooms like this and in the back rooms trying to negotiate a win-win-win situation. Greece was also involved. They wanted F-35s. We couldn't sell them F-35s until Turkey got its F-16s, or Turkey would have dropped out of the agreement. So Greece had to be very patient while Turkey addressed this issue. But in the end, we were able to get it. I should mention the last 24 hours of that agreement. We had set a deadline of January 26th, 2024 for everything to happen, or we would have to sell the F-35s to Greece, and that would have blown up the agreement with Turkey. And I had promised Turkey that if they would pass the resolution allowing Sweden in, by the time the document made its way to Washington, the physical document signed by President Erdogan and their parliament had to physically be at the State Department treaty room. I told them by the time it would get there, I would have the last U.S. senators and members of Congress lift their holds on the F-16 sale. Finally, the Turkish parliament took their action, gave the document to President Erdogan. He waited a couple of days and then signed it with only about 24 hours before the deadline, and then gave it to a lowly Turkish diplomat to take to Washington. That diplomat couldn't get a flight to Washington, so he got one to New York, and then he rented a car and drove with the document in the passenger seat along the Jersey Turnpike. And as it turned out, I needed all of this time, every minute, to reach the relevant senators and congressmen. I couldn't reach Jim Risch, who was fishing somewhere in Idaho, I think, out of cell phone range, and I needed all the time to get them to agree. But as it turned out, that drive down the Jersey Turnpike was enough time for me to get that part of it done. And the document was delivered just in time. But that had the benefit there was that it built trust. And that is a currency far more valuable than any one arms deal. Now, when I finished my ambassadorship, I actually got a smile out of President Erdogan. Maybe it was just because I was leaving. I'm not sure, but I'll take it. And I got the picture to prove it. So. But a few months ago, I sat down with a European ambassador from a European country at the Palace of Nations in Geneva. He told me, it used to be that we waited for the United States to take a position on a particular issue before taking our own position. We wanted to be informed by what the United States would do. He said, now, most times we don't even check. He wasn't gloating, he was lamenting. Decisions are being made in Geneva, in Beijing, in Brasilia, in Brussels, on aviation, cybersecurity, food safety, environmental rules, without us in the room. And once these standards are set, they are difficult and timely, or time-consuming to change. If we aren't shaping the rules, we'll be forced to live under someone else's rules. Just weeks ago, leaders of the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, met to expand their cooperation. Turkey wasn't in the room, but they are leaning closer to these nations, hedging their bets against the United States. Why? Because many of these countries increasingly see the U.S. as unreliable. They feel slighted, lectured, or abandoned. Too often, we've treated them as afterthoughts rather than partners or allies. This is dangerous because when America steps back, others, Russia and China especially, step in. They offer trade and infrastructure and influence, and unlike us, they aren't shy about rewriting the rules of the global system in their own favor. The BRICS countries now talk openly of new financial structures, new alliances, even new standards for global governance. These shifts might seem distant, but they affect every American, from the price of goods on our shelves to the security of our information online to the future of our freedoms. Global institutions will move on without us. The rules of trade, technology, and security are shaped by those who don't share our values. Now, let me close by saying a few words about what a privilege it is to represent the United States abroad as an ambassador and to witness the kindness and generosity of Americans toward people in countries around the globe. When there was a massive earthquake in Turkey in February of 2023 that killed more than 50,000 people, America put its best foot forward, contributing to rescue and recovery. This child, seen here, was pulled out from under the rubble 11 days after the quake. Now, let me just say that soft diplomacy can also be fun. As ambassador, I swam from Asia to Europe. Now, it's not as impressive as it sounds. If you're in Istanbul, of course, that straddles east and west, it straddles Asia and Europe. And they sponsor a swim every year. They drop you in just above what's called Second Bridge. And if you were to swim directly across the Bosphorus, it'd be about a mile. But you swim out, and then the current from the Black Sea carries you a bit, and you end up swimming over 4 miles until you climb out on the European side. I should note that a couple of weeks ago, the annual swim was held, and afterwards there was a Russian swim instructor who started the swim and didn't finish it. And there were rumors that he had drowned, but he was a swim instructor, and most of the attention is now focused on him swimming away from the Russian draft, which is a pretty smart move, if you ask me. But we got to do fun things like that, to swim from Asia to Europe. I mentioned that American movies are a big part of soft power. We had a movie theater in the basement of our residence in Ankara, where the Motion Picture Association actually funded those in several embassies and residences around the globe, where American movies would be shown to the countries, the officials, and then the general public. It's a big part of soft power. Now, of course, many Hollywood movies were made in Turkey as well, including a number of James Bond movies, like Skyfall, filmed on top of Istanbul's Grand Bazaar, which is coming up there. All right. You note that's not James Bond. That's a U.S. ambassador pretending to be James Bond. We knew the manager of the Grand Bazaar, and he let us up every once in a while. I was up there with a friend of ours, a childhood friend, and Cheryl said, "Pretend to be James Bond. I'll take a picture." She took it. I put it on Instagram. That was a dumb thing to do. Immediately, my embassy called and said, "People are asking what the ambassador is doing on top of the Grand Bazaar. Can we tell them it was photoshopped?" I said, "Well, you can tell them that, but it wasn't." That night, every newscast led with this story, and every newspaper in the next day, the next day had it. And the next day, all the news stations filmed a piece on top of the Grand Bazaar interviewing the head of the Grand Bazaar, asking how the U.S. ambassador got up there. I thought, oh no, this is going to be bad. But he said, "Hey, with all the movies filmed up here, people have thought that we've torn up the top of the roof. This let people know that it was fixed." I thought, whew, that's a good one. Now the beauty is, if you Google, and do it tonight, Google James Bond Grand Bazaar, that's the picture that comes up. I know, because I Google it 5 times a day just to keep it up there. But it's great. Soft power is wonderful. Now, back to the topic at hand. American leadership has never been inevitable. It's always been a choice. When we choose engagement, generosity, and reliability, we lead. When we choose disengagement, the world won't wait. It simply moves on without us. And what does this mean for you, students here at Rutgers? Well, you will inherit this political world. You will live with the consequences of whether America chooses to lead or retreat. I hope that you play a role in shaping it. And talking to you students today, I know you're going to be prepared. Some of you will enter diplomacy, others business, law, public service of another type, or education. But all of you will represent America abroad in one way or another. You are the living face of American soft power. Now, let's not confuse diplomacy and soft power with weakness. Let's not mistake it for softness. Soft power is strength under control. It is influence rooted in trust. It's leadership by example. The world will not wait. The question is, will America continue to step forward? Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ambassador Flake, for those insights and really, I'd say, an uplifting view of potential. Ambassador Flake has kindly agreed to take some questions, so we have a mic in the center aisle. If you would like to ask a question, I invite you to line up at the mic. When you get to the mic, please introduce yourself, first name, last name, and if you have an affiliation with Rutgers, please share that with us as well.
Questions about island survival are welcomed here.
Hi, my name is Sherry Garretts, and I'm a member of the community. You identify as a conservative. Do you feel like there are many of your fellow conservatives that could agree with the things you've been talking about tonight and would like to speak up, maybe just aren't speaking up as much? Do you feel like there's a critical mass of your fellow conservatives that could collaborate with people that don't identify that way and maybe change the tenor of what's going on now?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, I do. I do. I know that there's a critical mass. Now, in the last couple of cycles, there have been people elected who agree completely with where the administration is on these issues. But I can tell you there is a critical mass of others who belong to more of the Reagan school, I guess, of foreign policy and need for soft power. They are there, but right now they are certainly fearful. The president can control really any Republican primary that he wishes to at this time. And so So yeah, it's a difficult thing to speak up, but I know they're there. And just for example, one thing that I've been really concerned about is a lack of support for Ukraine and its independence and sovereignty. There's a resolution sitting in the Senate with more than 80 co-sponsors. And I wish it would move forward, but they're waiting for maybe the president to come around more to that position, and he might. I hope he does. But I wish they would move on their own. But yes, there are many in the party who I think are ready to move back to more traditional brand of conservatism, but it's a difficult thing right now. Thank you.
Hello, Senator. Thank you for speaking. My name is Imad Haq. I'm currently a graduate student at the Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy. I attended this lecture in hopes to get a better understanding of, democracy, diplomacy, and soft power. I have a question. I actually had previously worked on an initiative for Gen AI MedTech internationally. My question to you, are you familiar with any standing of, health policy regarding Gen AI and MedTech in the United States?
I'm not. I'm sorry. I would like to answer that, but I'm not familiar with it. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is James DeBlasi. I'm a freshman at Rutgers. I'm an engineering major, but I'm really interested in geopolitics, so I really appreciate you coming to speak to everyone. And my question is, with the U.S. seeming to move towards an isolationist policy agenda, what are some changes that need to be made either by the U.S. government, the Secretary of State, or by U.S. citizens as a whole that will see the United States embrace a more soft power policy diplomatically?
Thank you. I think send everybody to an island to be alone for a week. And then, no, short of that, no, I do think that, with regard to an isolationist policy or protectionist trade policy, we've tried that before, and it doesn't work. And I do think that as we go through the next months and years, we'll be reminded of that. Certainly in years beyond that, you'll find out that a protectionist trade policy, particularly in a global society like the one we have now, we need to remember, I think my former colleagues need to be reminded that we only control about 20% of the world's GDP. We're by far the biggest player, the most important player, but we're not the only player. And if we, for too long, are seen as unreliable trade partners or ones that are putting up trade barriers, then other trade alliances will be struck up. That's with the BRICS countries and others. And people will move on, and that will be to our detriment. And what has been really most upsetting is to see, Republicans, for me, to see Republicans and conservatives kind of badmouth the rules-based international order that we established, after World War II, which has certainly benefited other countries, but we have benefited far more. And this notion that the rest of the world is somehow ripping us off and we need to get back at them, that's just what's really upsetting. So in answer to your question, what needs to be done, I don't suppose that we'll see anybody all of a sudden stand up in Congress and say, I'm going to take a different position. But the courts may intervene as well. There's a very important case, a combination of two cases coming before the Supreme Court, expedited, which will talk about the tariffs and whether that's Congress's province or the president's province. And clearly, in my view, the Constitution gives that power to Congress, the power to tax. And so I hope that something like that will maybe trigger those in Congress. I can tell you, most of my former colleagues don't like to be sidelined like this. They really don't. But politically, it's tough to do anything else. So maybe the courts can help, and just time, like I said, tariffs are highly inflationary. And that is, I think, showing more now than anything. And nothing will turn opinion around more quickly than the economy going the other way. So thank you for the question.
Thank you so much.
That's a long walk down that aisle.
It is, that's for
Yeah.
a short person. Hi, I'm Judy Marino, a member of the community, and I have a question. When the current administration is over and America seeks to rebuild its prestige in the world, where should we start?
Well, somebody asked in the last meeting we had, is what has happened so far, is any of it irreparable? No, it's not. We can rebuild the trust. It may be difficult in certain areas, like I said, because in certain areas people are moving on, and that will require, coming back to a different alliance or trade agreement. But first, to start with, I think to stop the rhetoric that the rest of the world is ripping us off, or that they're a bunch of dummies, or that they're not running their own economies well or systems well. I think the language that we use when we refer to the press as an enemy of the people, that has to stop. So I think first and foremost, use the right language. That people watch, they listen. And what I tell my former colleagues in Congress, people overseas, world leaders and others, don't just watch the presidency, they watch the Congress. They know that the president only serves 1 or maybe 2 terms, but certain members of Congress, Chuck Grassley, are there for 30 or 40 years, and many, and leaders around the world know that. It's not just Chuck Schumer. There's a lot of people who are there, and world leaders know that. So it's important for members of Congress to speak out as well and let the world know this protectionist phase we're going through, this isolationist phase will end. And that's important for other people to speak as well. So thank you.
Good evening, I'm Noah Miller. I'm a current finance and economics senior here at Rutgers. And I think naturally my biggest concern, or a major concern of mine, is our current debt rate and the ability for our country to be able to lend at the same volume and rates that we currently do. And I wonder how you balance that issue with not only other countries' dependence on our soft diplomacy, as you talked about, but also hard diplomacy, both with our lending of different military assets to other countries and also supporting NATO. Obviously, hopefully countries start moving towards START goals, but how do you balance those 3 large problems at the same time?
Well, great. Well, you've identified a big one, our national debt, our debt to GDP. We've passed every threshold that we thought would trigger a different response. Gratefully, we're still globally on the fiscal front the best house in a bad neighborhood. And as long as that is still the case, and we are still the world's reserve currency, we'll be able to blow by those thresholds. But we can't do it forever. And at some point, we have to worry about other countries like the BRICS and others. Maybe we're not going to be the sole reserve currency anymore. And if that happens, then our debt really becomes a problem. So it behooves us to act before we do that. In terms of our military posture and what we pay for and what we don't, our support for Ukraine and for Europe supporting Ukraine is good bang for the buck, still, in my view. I have admired President Trump's insistence that our European allies pay more of the share to keep their own defense strong, get up to the 2% and maybe more. That will help us out a great deal. But yes, we have to get a hold of our own fiscal situation. Great question.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Chris Basic. I'm a freshman here at Rutgers. And my question pertains to, you were talking about how soft power isn't just economic, it's social. It's about how people view America. With a lot of what's been happening with the recent administration, a lot of norms in our society, you could say, have been broken. How do you think the perception of the U.S. has changed abroad since then, and how do you think it'll affect soft power?
Thank you. That is something I'm very concerned about. Just take one issue. I mentioned freedom of the press. when our president refers to, the press as the enemy of the people, that harkens back to unsavory characters using that phrase, and it gives license to heads of state elsewhere who run an authoritarian regime and think I have license to do so. If the U.S. is doing it, if they're labeling their press that way or treating their press that way, then I can get away with it. And that is really concerning. But it's like I said, it's over the grand scheme of things, it can change. It's changed quickly in some ways, and I think it can change back. But we have to be careful that, like I say, disengaging from a lot of these international fora that make decisions on, like in what they're doing in Geneva on aviation safety or cybersecurity. If we're not in the room, then those rules get set, and we have to abide by those rules for a long time. And there's a danger there, because that affects Americans a lot more than we think. Thank you.
Hi, Senator. My name is Peter McAndrew. I'm a sophomore here at Rutgers. So the other questioners here today have asked basically about like general geopolitical situations, but I'd like to ask more about your specific tenure as an ambassador in Turkey. So I know during your time as an ambassador there was a lot of turmoil in the general area where Turkey is in the world. So I'd like to ask like how you exactly dealt with things in like Syria or in Israel with the current Palestinian conflict and with the new regime change in Syria.
Thank you. This is a great question. Like I said, there's always things going on in Turkey, partly because of the neighborhood it's in. If you run around counterclockwise, you've got Syria, Iraq, Iran, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, and then the Black Sea with Russia on the other side, and then Romania, Bulgaria, and Greece. That's quite a neighborhood you've got there. So there's always something going on. Syria has been really important. And I think none of us saw the Syrian civil war ending the way it did. And I happen to think that President Trump did the right thing in recognizing the new Syrian government and saying, now you're going to be accountable. And also playing a role in the Armenian-Azerbaijan resolution. That was worked on by the Biden administration quite a bit as well, but the Trump administration has continued it. So the neighborhood, there's a lot going on. Turkey itself, there's concerns about democratic backsliding, the jailing of the Istanbul mayor. And as an ambassador, you have to obviously weigh those things and weigh in when you can, but also recognize that as ambassador, you cannot interfere in your host government's internal politics. So it's a fine line when we want to promote values of democracy. It's a fine line to walk. You do the best you can. At one point, I met with the opposition figure just before an election, and President Erdogan, he knows that U.S. ambassadors meet with opposition figures. When he was an opposition figure in the 1990s, the U.S. ambassador met with him. But he used that opportunity politically to say, Ambassador Flake will not darken my door. He can't get in to see me. That night, I got a call from his national security advisor inviting me to the president's iftar the next day. So it was, but politically they'll say things, but the U.S., we want our foreign policy to be based on values as well. So you do the best you can as an ambassador to promote those values, but also not be PNG'd and kicked out of the country.
All right,
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mary Malihi. I'm a junior here at Rutgers, and I'm the Deputy News Director at WRSU 88.7 FM New Brunswick. It's our student radio station, and we try to cover things from a Rutgers, but also like general college student perspective.
Right.
So as you know, over the past few weeks, we've learned very quickly that college campuses are a hub for political action, but also learning who you really are and who your friends really are. And just like understanding what you want to do in your career later on. So my question, since you briefly brought up your childhood, was how do you think your cultural upbringing, your college experiences have impacted your approach to politics, and how do you think college campuses and college students can learn from that?
Well, thank you. That's a great question. I grew up in a small town called Snowflake, Arizona. My name is Flake, yes, Snowflake. It was named after my great-great-grandfather and Erastus Snow, a combination of their names. I mentioned in the last class that I grew up on a cattle ranch with 10 brothers and sisters and 69 first cousins on my father's side alone. That's how I got elected later in Arizona. But sitting around the dinner table, we had a lot of discussions about politics, and I watched the example of my father, who served as the mayor of Snowflake for a while. It kind of came by rotation, I think, there. My uncle Jake Flake from Snowflake was the Speaker of the House in Arizona. It's okay to be a flake in Arizona. It's kind of a point of pride. But I watched them in terms of, let me back up a little before that. The town that I grew up, Snowflake, was settled by Mormon pioneers who came to colonize. And the church was concerned at one point in the late 1800s that there might be too many members of the church on the Republican side or the Democratic side, and then the administration may not favor one or the other. And so they went to, on a Sunday, the church leadership went in many congregations, said those sitting in the left pews, register Democrat, those in the right, register Republican. In Snowflake, the demarcation was Main Street. Those east of Main Street were to register Democrat, those west of Main Street, Republican. The Flakes were east of Main Street. And so until my father's generation, we were proud Democrats. And then I guess worked up the courage to change, I guess. But what I saw from that is that people certainly registered from either party, but we didn't hate the other side. Never, ever. I never saw my father or my uncles or aunts or others who were participating in politics ever demean somebody with a different political party or political view. And that colored the way I entered politics. And I just could never see somebody on the other side of the aisle as an enemy. And I think that when you look at what's happened on college campuses, Cheryl and I, 2 weeks ago, gave a speech kind of like this on the campus of Utah Valley University the day before Charlie Kirk was killed there. And so it's not an idle thing. We've got to do better as a country, and I hope follow the advice of Utah's governor to tone down the rhetoric and tone down the temperature and to disagree better. And so thank you for that question.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, thank you, Senator Flake, for addressing us tonight. My name is Ashiana Ahmed. I'm a senior at Rutgers, and I'm part of the Rutgers Democracy Lab. So my question is a little bit shifting gears, but as someone who is a Model UN educator, I work with a lot of high school students, and something that I see a lot with them is just this feeling of distance from foreign policy and the ability to impact it in any meaningful way. So what I wanted to ask was just how you would recommend Americans who are interested in foreign policy, who want to have an influence in it, to go about that, and maybe something that goes ignored that the American public doesn't often pay attention to that they should be paying attention to.
Okay. Well, thank you. I would say foreign policy affects everything. I ultimately ran for Congress because I was in Arizona running a think tank, enjoying the policy work, but I missed the international things and missed that. I would encourage students to realize it makes a big difference to work on foreign policy. Now, they may look at U.S. campaigns and realize foreign policy rarely comes up during a campaign. Many politicians, when I was in Congress, would brag that they didn't have a passport because they didn't want people they would think they would fly across the world on the taxpayer dime, and that they were only concerned about domestic policy. But I think to be involved in foreign policy, that's the most fun, certainly, and the most impactful. Because as I mentioned, the U.S. is only 20% of the world's economy now. And we're a multipolar world, but we want to spread our influence because that makes us more happy and prosperous as well as the world. And thank you.
Hi, my name is Aliana Hernandez. I'm a first year here at Rutgers. I basically just wanted to ask you, with everything that was going on with Turkey, you mentioned that you don't really like the strong arming tactics, but let's say there was no other way to go about it. How would you have gone about strong arming them in a way that's different than other people, or in a way that's different than how the tactics in general are just perceived?
Okay, thank you, great question. There is a place for hard power. Let me just give one example with Turkey. Turkey was involved with the US and a whole consortium of countries to build the F-35 fighter jet. It was manufactured in Turkey more than 1,000 parts for the F-35. But in 2016, Turkey purchased a Russian weapon system that, if deployed, would give the Russians access that we didn't want them to have to the F-35 and how it works and operates. We had no choice but to kick Turkey out of the F-35 program. Turkey still has 6 F-35s that it owns that we can't ship to them because they own this Russian weapon system. And Congress has passed a law saying until they get rid of that weapon system, they can't even house it in the country. It has to be out of the country. They cannot get back in the F-35 program. That was the right policy to take. We had to. Now, gratefully, Turkey is looking for ways to get back in the fold and to get back into that program. But that will require they take the measures that we outlined. So yes, there are times where you have to use hard power. You try to avoid it, but sometimes it's inevitable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Gigi. I'm from the country of Georgia, from the capital Tbilisi. I'm a freshman at Rutgers, and I'm majoring in political science. So my question is based on Georgia. So do you see Georgia joining the European Union anytime soon? And if so, what's the course in the future? Thank you.
Okay. I would certainly like to see Georgia join the European Union. I think it may take longer than we would like, simply because Russia, they've lost influence in a lot of areas. Just recently, they've lost a lot of influence in Armenia because of their focus in Ukraine. I think Russia feels they have a strong hold, obviously, on a lot of Georgia, so it'll be very hard for them to see it go. But it would be the best thing for Georgia and good for the European Union and security as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Bradford Wallace. I'm a junior from Rutgers Business School. A question more towards you. You spoke about your college years a little bit with meeting your wife, but I'm just curious, what other things did you do in college that were related to your career now?
Thanks. Not enough studying. I did discover the library, gratefully, after Hawaii. But I was just looking. I didn't play intercollegiate sports, but I spent too much time on the basketball court and doing things like that. But I came from a family that really didn't have the means, being the fifth of 11. I didn't have much help financially, and I wanted to make it out of college debt-free. And so that meant that I worked 2 jobs almost all the time going through college. And then Cheryl worked as well to help me get the graduate degree. So I wish I would have had more time to join groups like Democracy Lab. I didn't even know many of them existed because I had to spend too much time working. But yeah, I guess it's the only way I could get through school, but I wish I would have had more time to study foreign policy. I had served a mission for my church in South Africa, and I speak the language Afrikaans, which I was able to test out of when I got back to college, and then get my first job because of that, from a firm that had some clients down in the area. And I wish I could have spent time with another language. Probably Spanish would do me a lot more good than Afrikaans in Arizona, not so much. But anyway, yeah, there are a lot of things in college I wish I would have been able to do.
Thank you.
Thanks. it's the last question that always gets you. At least in the old town halls I used to do as a politician.
Hello, Senator. Thank you for speaking with us today. My name is Janae Gu. I'm a junior here at Rutgers at Political Science. So my question to you is, how can the U.S. effectively use soft power in the regions where trust in American leadership has declined?
I'm sorry, how can we
use soft power where trust in our regions have declined?
Yeah. Well, it's, like I said, the one example I used in Africa with PEPFAR, PEPFAR ostensibly is continuing, but a lot of USAID programs have been dismantled, and a lot of them supported PEPFAR. So it's difficult to run some of the flagship programs that have been so effective around the world, like PEPFAR, without reinvigorating programs like USAID. So I would just think over time, we're going to realize that these soft power programs are effective. And I can tell you, many people in Congress who are silent now understand how important some of these soft power programs are. Let me mention one that I just didn't mention before. I mentioned education programs are important, but a lot of our military exchanges are extremely important. That kind of borders on hard power, soft power. But in Turkey, for quite a while, because of distrust they had for the U.S., they discontinued their military exchanges. And so we're working through a time now, it'll probably last almost a decade, where we don't have any trained military officers who are Turkish in the Turkish militaries who have had exchanges and experience with the U.S. military system. That hurts. That really is to our detriment. So it behooves us to reestablish as many of these programs as quickly as we can so that we don't face any more long-term damage. But thank you.
Thank you.
Let me just say what a privilege it's been to be here. This has been wonderful. I've enjoyed so much meeting with the students and with community members, and this is just a great place. So thank you for making Cheryl and me feel so welcome here. Thank you.